Well, it couldn't be clearer, could it? Yet it hasn't been that clear to us over the centuries, and maybe even now. I mean, what it's all about. It is all about love. Jesus says today. And it's clear enough, I suppose, in the Hebrew Scriptures, because that quote about loving your God with your whole being is the famous Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, and strength. It says there, your whole mind. It says here, your whole being is what's involved. So that's a central proclamation, a central passage in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Jewish tradition, which of course is still used today as a primary prayer. The other one about loving your neighbor as yourself, well, of course, thematically, in its content, it's everywhere. But that one little verse, Jesus kind of scratched out of the middle of the book of Leviticus, which is interesting. Leviticus 19. But if it's clear enough in the Hebrew Scriptures, it's absolutely patent and evident in the New Testament, in the Christian Scriptures. Not only from a passage like this, but elsewhere too, where, for example, Paul says to the Romans, love is the fulfillment of the whole law. Exactly what Jesus is saying here. He's just repeating Jesus' own doctrine. And then he explains, love does no wrong to the neighbor, so therefore all the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, steal, kill, etc., are fulfilled by that one commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So Paul makes it very clear as well. If anything, St. John in his letters is even clearer when he says God is love. That's a sufficient description of God. The only fully accurate one, perhaps. The deepest one. Even God is being, and what being is love. So you have to know that. And whoever loves, St. John says, whoever loves at all, really truly loves, is born of God and knows God. And as I've said before, that's one of the most mind-blowing verses in the whole Bible. Whoever loves is born of God and knows God. That's an amazing claim. But there it is. And of course, John's Gospel brings us back to Jesus' own words just before he dies, passing on his last will and testament to us, and he says, one new commandment I give you, to love one another. As I have loved you, which is the hook here, but it's love. To love with that same sacrificial love with which I have loved you. And by this, he adds, will all people know or not, that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. But I guess it's too easy and it's too challenging because we've always, in some way, put the emphasis somewhere else. Believing the right things, believing exactly the right doctrines in exactly the right way, to make sure you belong to exactly the right group, and we've burned people at the stake for stuff like that over the centuries. Why don't we burn people at the stake for not loving enough? For not sacrificing enough? I'm not advising we burn anybody at the stake. The point being, you don't do that because that's not loving. But we do it anyway because, partly because of theocracy. Really, I think. When religion, any religion, becomes too connected to, identified with the state and with politics, then it becomes much more a matter of control, conformity, self-interest, protecting the state and its boundaries. So we've got to keep the right boundaries. Everybody's got to conform to the right way of thinking and acting. Otherwise, politically, it falls apart. But that's why it's a very, very bad alliance when it's carried too far, as it usually is. historically and in our own times as well, currently. Whether in Islam, or Christianity, or Judaism, anytime you have that too close connection, that theocratic tendency, we're in for real trouble, politically and especially religiously. Please, separation of church and state is a great idea. Let it be more than an idea. So we should focus back on what the gospel actually says, what the scriptures actually say about love. And loving, well, it involves protecting the loved one, as God does us, especially when we're talking about children or other defenseless people. Protecting is a big part of love. Nonetheless, as we grow to adult love, a more mature love, it's less about protection and more about welcoming, respecting, embracing, delighting in, letting expand, making free, setting free. For liberty, Christ has set us free. So it's about giving freedom, giving space, respecting and affirming, encouraging. That's what really love should be among anybody. Parents and children, friends, anywhere, in the church. It should be about that. That's what love should look like. Love does look like. I think experience shows that to us. So we should treat one another that way. Love your neighbor as yourself. And to treat one another as we would be treated, the golden rule. There's a I think it's a car insurance ad on TV these days. I forget exactly what, but it's someone calling up the company, and it's the person who answers on the other end is the same person who's calling. So-and-so treats you the way you would treat you. You've seen that ad. Great idea. Love your neighbor as yourself. But maybe that's part of the problem. Because how do you treat yourself? Do you love yourself enough to love your neighbor the same way? Or if you love your neighbor as you loved yourself, would it be a disaster? And where does that come from? A wonderful spiritual writer today has said that self-hatred is the worst demon in the world today. There's something to that. So why don't we love ourselves? It's not because don't have the right appearance, we're not successful enough, not pretty enough. And all that goes back to something deeper, which is maybe we don't feel loved, first of all, so we can love ourselves. We can't just love without knowing love. Maybe it's the way our parents treated us, or priests treated us, or the teachers treated us, that we didn't really learn to love ourselves. It was too conditional. It was about the conformity and that kind of thing that I was just talking about. And so we don't really feel loved, and maybe that even goes back to God, to our experience of God. We don't really think God loves us either. So in turn, how can we love God with our whole being? Not just, okay, I love God, but with our whole being, heart, mind, soul, strength, if we don't think He loves us. I mean, I think a lot of the issue about, do you believe me? Do you believe that God exists? All this debate is, it's really deep down saying, do you have any experience of God? Do you trust God? Do you know God lovingly? Because if you have an experience of God, if you know God's love by, existentially, well, of course He exists. Why would anybody even raise that issue? It's just a notional, it becomes a metaphysical, intellectual problem or a dilemma. It's not existential really. So when we say, do we believe in God, we're not saying, do you believe God exists? We're saying, do you trust God? Have you had an experience of God? Have you met God? Do you know God? Does He, as He knows us, He loves us, do we know Him and love Him in turn? How many of us can say that we do? How many of us can say that we actually do love God because we've met God? We have an experience of God. And I guarantee that if we actually have met God and have had an experience of God, we cannot but love God when we discover who God really is, which is, surprise, surprise, love. God is love. And that true love about which we're speaking, which delights in, encourages, sets free, expands, sets forth on our way, who delights in us and encourages us, cherishes us, helps us to grow. That's what love does. And that's what you experience when you experience God for real. Wow, someone who unconditionally, and love is always unconditional. I repeat, love is always unconditional. God loves me totally anyway. He delights in me. He created me. He gives me His own life and love. He sets me free. He expands me with His own life and love. What's not to love? So we can love ourselves if God does. I mean, that's a pretty good example. Precedent. God loves me so I can love myself and I can love others the way God loves them, because it's God's love in me anyway, going through me. But the point is, that's how we can fulfill that first and greatest commandment, by having an experience of God, actually getting to know God, who is love, and responding as only we can when our heart's been bewitched and seduced and won over. Wow, I love this God, who is love, who loves me and who loves everyone. I want to spread that good news. I want to spread that love in the world. So that's how we can fulfill the first and greatest commandment with our whole being, when it's not just a commandment. You better do this or I'm going to throw you into hell for all eternity. What kind of God is that? Not the God you meet, who is only love and never gives up on you, who delights in you and sets you free. That's the real God. That's a God, a lovable God. So it's a little deeper, a little more complicated, and a little more challenging than maybe first appears. Right? All the more reason to delve into it, leap into it, to try to discover it more deeply, since that is what it's all about. In any religion or religious practice that is not primarily and clearly about love, and about a love that sets free and delights in, that's no religion, that's no God. It's an idol. Don't fall for it.